So I want to start by setting the expectation that as Chromium, our goal is to responsibly move the web platform forward. And there's two important bits to this statement: that we need to be responsible because we do work in this broad open platform. It's not just about what bits go in the Chrome bucket. And we have this responsibility to the open web, but also we believe we should be actively moving the web platform forward. The web needs new features and capabilities, so we do have to sort of push the envelope there. And the process that we use in Chromium for all web exposed changes is called the Blink process or the Chromium process, or sometimes the intent process, whatever you call it. Its goal is to enable experimentation, but ensure that we're carefully evaluating the risks and benefits of new features, including opinions from other vendors, the W3C tag, and web developers, before we make a call as to whether the feature is something we think Chromium should ship by default. Now, that process interacts with open standards processes. It doesn't replace them, but it does run alongside it at the same time. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The process I'm about to describe, by the way, is outlined in detail on the launching features page on chromium.org. This is a good place to read through kind of the long form version of this deck. We did a big revamp of this earlier this year to kind of modernize it. I'm sure we're going to be tweaking it as we go as well. But there's a general pattern that all features go through, this pattern of researching a problem, designing and prototyping, and then iterating on a solution until it's time to ship or possibly not ship. And our aim in the entirety of this process is to try to have as few hard gates as possible. We want to enable experimentation. We want to encourage open incubation. And then, of course, we want to ensure a commitment to high quality open design before we ship features. But let's take this process from the top, and we're going to walk through kind of the journey of a feature in Chromium from an idea to shipping. And the first question that we always ask, of course, is, well, what do we work on? And Chromium is a very rich ecosystem, as I'm sure you've all been discovering in the last 2 days. But as Yoav mentioned in the keynote yesterday particularly, and we don't like have this single master plan of all of the features that we're going to put into Chromium with exact priority order and exact ship dates across multiple years. I mean, we do try to plan, but that's not really the way it works, particularly with this open ecosystem. And in reality, the Chromium project takes input from a lot of different places. Many different people are looking at different sections of the platform to try to get new ideas and new problems. But once you've identified that a problem is something worth spending time on, the first step is to really spend time researching the problem itself and the use cases around it. Now, we haven't always been perfect at this, but we do need to try very hard to focus first on the problems, not the proposed solution, not writing down the IDLE for a new API as step one, but researching the use cases, the problem space, the developer needs, rather than first inventing a solution and looking for the problem. And this is also the point where you should file a new feature in Chrome status very early. Before you have a solution even, you should file a new feature in Chrome status. Jason Robbins gave a great talk an hour ago about the revamp we're in the middle of really with Chrome status. And the whole point of this is to manage the feature journey from beginning to end. We're continually refining our approach to this and adding more things to it. But the Chrome status tool now has a guide user experience. Its whole point is to guide you through every step of this feature journey. And this also generates things like intent emails for you along the way and guide you through that process to make sure you don't forget anything or to build the case for your feature. So the first step after you've done some research into the problem is write an explainer that just details the problem space. And an explainer is a short, hopefully no more than a page or two, explanation of the problem space at this point. It develops into solutions later, but the beginning explainer is just an explanation of the problem space. And the goal at this stage is to get out in public with that explainer. You might have a suggested solution, but it's really critically important not to fall in love with that first good idea for a solution, because if you build a design for a great hammer, of course, every problem is going to end up looking like a nail. So this is the point where the explainer should go to a public forum. frequently for a lot of web platform features. This may go to the YCG discourse or the GitHub proposals repo when if they're in a little more mature state. And this probably results in you getting a dedicated public incubation repository to work on. Like you've gone out in public, you've gotten a couple people to say, hey, that looks like an interesting problem, and we move it into public. If it doesn't, that's fine. You can keep it in a personal repo or something like that, as long as it's still publicly available and you're still working on it in public. Because this enables the community to get involved. This is a way to get other viewpoints on the problems that you're trying to solve. Because we're building this platform for the whole web, not just for Chrome or Chromium or even the set of customers that we have direct contact to. And now you can start really designing the solution. And if others have gotten interested in the same problem, they can help, they can participate in that. And at this point in the Chrome status tool, this is when you start the prototyping stage. Because now that you have a clear understanding of what you're trying to solve and why you're trying to solve that, like the parameters of that problem, you can start figuring out what a solution looks like. And of course, you're going to want to build code for that. So during this stage, the Chrome status tool generates an intent to prototype email that you send to BlinkDev. And this publicly notifies other people, not that you're working on the problem, that's the feature itself in Chrome status, but that you're going to be landing code behind a flag related to this problem. This step, by the way, was previously called intent to implement. That resulted in a lot of confusion because it sounded like you were implementing a solution that was already fixed. And that wasn't actually what we were trying to communicate. We're trying to communicate, we're landing some code behind a flag to experiment in this space. There's not, at this point, a really strong commitment that you're ever even going to ship this solution. So the purpose of this step was to make sure that code owners won't be surprised when they see code starting to land in the area. But up through this point, I want to be clear, you haven't been required to get any broad, like, project-wide approvals. Like, this isn't a hard gate, this is a notification, in essence. And the next step in a feature's journey, of course, is just keep evolving that design, experimenting in code, changing your prototype and improving it, working together with the community on the design, and really just iterating on the development of that, both in the specification in the standards world, but in your code under a flag in Chromium. And at this point, engineers are going to be landing more and more code in Chromium under flags. You're going to be asking developers to try out those designs by flipping on the flags, even though the features are, of course, switched off by default. And this is also the stage where that open collaboration in the standard space becomes even more important, because when you get to the end, you do want to prove that this is a multi-stakeholder project. And once you've got the design and experimental implementation functionally complete, like the problem space you set out to address, you can actually solve it with the set of code that you have checked in under a flag. We've been introducing this new phase called dev trials, and this isn't something that you explicitly start. It's really a notification that's driven by the Chrome status tool that's like waving your hand saying, hey, we think we have a solution to this space now. We'd really like developers to take a look at it. And it also notifies things like, hey, this is when we should complete our documentation and be ready to go out there in public. This is also the point when you probably want to, if you haven't already, request a tag review for your explainer and your initial design. The technical architecture group helps review the entire web platform for coherence and consistency. And if you haven't done it already, which you may have, then you probably want to ask for this now to make sure that they're looking at the whole design. This is also the right time to start asking for other horizontal reviews. Probably for privacy and security, you've probably already asked for earlier on, but accessibility and internationalization are things that once you have a pretty complete design, you want to get them to weigh in on that. And if you haven't had other browser vendors weigh in already, this is a good time to explicitly go to them and say, what do you think of this feature? And Chrome status helps you manage these signals. Now, in Chrome, we also have a tool called origin trials. This isn't a mandatory step. I want to be really clear. It's a way to get even broader testing on a feature. Jason Chase gave a great talk on the origin trials yesterday, so please go look that up for more detail. But the point of origin trials is that this lets you broadly test features in actual deployment to a wide variety of users, not just those of us, like most of us here, who are happy to turn on magic flags, to turn on experimental features. But origin trials still prevent just letting those features burn into the web platform. Now, finally, when you're confident that an API is in really good shape and it would solve real developer and user problems, that's when it's time to try to ship it. And when you want to ship a feature on by default, you need to prove that that design is mature enough to do that without causing excessive risk to the web platform. So you send this intent to ship mail, and this is really the first real gate, the major real gate. You may have had a gate with an origin trial, but an intent to ship is a required stage where the API owners actually have to sign off on your feature. And they evaluate things like, what's the compat and interop risk of this? What are the benefits of it? Do they outweigh the risk? You need to prove that you've reached out for tag review and that you've gotten horizontal reviews and that you've responded to any feedback you may have gotten from there. And more than anything, you have to show that you paved the path for eventual interop, that you have web platform tests, that you have a really solid public spec, that you have vendor signals, hopefully from other vendors that say, hey, this is a really important feature, or we would consider implementing this in the future, or we're implementing it now, or any of those things. Now, there are many cases where the feature team may be a little optimistic. The API owners ask a lot of questions on purpose, and they may conclude that there's more work to be done before the feature can ship. And I want to be clear, that's fine. That's part of the process. That doesn't mean that something's wrong. So intent to ship is a notification, but it doesn't necessarily mean this is going to ship in the next build or anything like that. Now, I also want to call out, because sometimes when we don't explicitly mention this, people think this never happens. There are cases where there are features that just don't ship, that we get all the way through this. We've done dev trials on them. We've built them. We've maybe even run an origin trial. And we decide, you know, the compat risk for this just isn't high enough. We may decide not to ship this feature because the risk inherent in it is just too high, not offset by its benefits. That's okay too. That's not a negative thing. And I want to wrap up a final thread here by saying that when we don't have other vendors strongly on board, when those vendor signals aren't really strongly, oh yes, this is great, and we're on track with the spec to have a shared specification, if you don't have a solidly wrapped up open standards trajectory for a spec, like there's not a W3C working group working on a rec track standard in this space, and we ship that feature, this isn't failure to us. Like we're still going to be pushing the web platform forward. Some of the vendors are definitely lagging in some of the areas, but we do have a responsibility to continue to drive that standards work. Like we don't get to just drop it and walk away because we've shipped a feature if the spec isn't finished, if we don't have that buy-off on interop. Chromium shipping that feature that's still in incubation isn't the end of that particular story. We have to continue to push for cross-vendor standardization. So things to take away from this, really, there's a difference between the Chromium and standards process, but they're designed to really work together to both ship high quality code with low interop cost in Chromium and to build a solid open web platform. And our intent process is really what we're trying to do to put gates in that perspective along the way. And ultimately, keep in mind, just shipping a feature in Chromium is not the ultimate goal. Getting an interoperable standards platform is really the goal. And with that, that's really the end of the presentation part of the talk. Thanks for your attention. I wanted to take a quick look at the Slack channel and see if there's any questions, or feel free to raise your hand in the meet as well. So let me stop presenting here. Let's see. So I don't see any questions currently in the breakout room. Does anyone in the call have questions or comments?
I raised my hand to ask you a controversial question to get the discussion started, Chris. Can I go?
Yeah, please.
So how do you talk about striking this balance, and we hear people on both sides, you know, there's folks who feel like we're the process is too onerous and we're too slow to do things. And there's a lot of folks, especially some of our friends at Mozilla, maybe elsewhere, who claim that we're way too eager to ship new things and we're shipping stuff sloppily before it's ready. What's your personal opinion? How do you think we're doing? Where do you think we've struck a balance well? Where do you think? And I'm not asking you to speak for Google, and so you should speak freely. And where do you think? Yeah. Where would you like to see us do better?
So I will actually explicitly disassociate my answer from Google, because that's a big responsibility I don't want to take on off the cuff. I think in general, we actually do a pretty good job. Like, I've been sitting in on the API owners meetings for quite a while now, just not participating as one of them. Like, I don't make those decisions, but I get to see the decision-making process. And I think that we do have to be very crisp about what we're building. And if we can't get engagement from a bunch of other cross-vendor, cross-industry participants, then the bar kind of goes up for what we have to do to prove that this is a good feature. And sometimes that's around specific horizontals that we don't necessarily spend enough time on if we're not pressed to a little bit, and that's fine. So we need to go spend a little more time looking at the privacy implications of a feature, or the the fingerprinting implications. Like, a good example of this is the web audio spec that I spent tons of time on. I used to be an editor on, and the privacy interest group did a review of this recently, and they came up with some fingerprinting concerns. And they are actually real fingerprinting concerns. Like, we have to go start digging into them and understanding them better and raising the bar across the board for that. And I think that's a healthy thing for the environment. At the same time, just saying, hey, we shouldn't do this at all because there are concerns, is not a productive end. And I believe very firmly that we do need to continue to push the web platform forward as a whole. So how we balance that out and how we can apply our resources to making sure we're being responsible is kind of the whole reason why I'm doing this job, I guess, more than anything, is because I want us to use our resources to make sure we're being responsible, but still use that energy to move the web forward. And I cannot, Riley, I think you were up. You had your hand raised next.
Yeah. So another hard question, maybe. So I actually I get this question a lot from developers. I got it this morning. They're really interested in an API that we're working on. It's currently a prototype behind a flag, or maybe it's an origin trial. And the end of the origin trial is coming, and they want to know, like, they're a small company, they don't have that many developers. Should they invest in this? Is it real? I've gotten questions about APIs that we shipped 4 years ago that are still marked as experimental in MDN, and people ask me, like, is this real? Does it really exist? Should I be using it? What kind of statements can we make to developers about things that are either in development or have shipped, maybe are in that incubation stage and have still have some cross-vendor disagreement about whether these things are something that they can depend on in their businesses?
So I think that one of the things that I'm hoping that I can get out of the next year is better communication of what incubation means at various stages. And I look at this as some incubations are very early incubations. Some of them they're kind of hung up for one reason or another. They don't have enough implementer support from other vendors, but Chromium has been shipping them. I think when we ship something in Chromium, we have made a decision that we believe in this feature so strongly that it would have to be a pretty dramatic reason for us to pull that feature out entirely, to deprecate it or just get rid of it. Like, we chose to take on that interop risk and that compat risk for the future. So I think that if we're shipping something in Chromium, we're largely past that for companies that are trying to depend on that, or people who are developers who are trying to depend on those features. The answer is pretty clear. We believe in it. We've shipped it. You can pretty much depend on it. I mean, any feature, we might find a massive problem with or something and have to change it in the future. But barring that level of drastic change, I think that it's dependable. When we're still in, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, like, the Chrome is a Google product. Google loves to kill things all the time.
Yes.
How do we know?
I mean, I think that the really important thing to understand there is that Chromium is an open project, and it's not Google in that sense. Like, it's not a Google project that we're going to yank pieces out at some point because Google decided Reader isn't worth spending money on or anything. We have a whole ecosystem here, and that ecosystem is not just Google. So it wouldn't make sense for us to pull things out that other people were depending on when there are other people who can manage that risk as well. I think for things that are still really in incubation, that are in a flag, under a flag, or in a dev trial or an origin trial, where we're still trying to get enough buy-in or to pass the bars that I was talking about to reduce the future risk, compat risk and interop risk, it's hard to give really blanket guidance to anyone because I do think there's higher risk there. We may get to the point of a feature that's in development and say, we can't ship this yet. We don't have a solid enough backing for it. We're worried that the world is going to change based on other factors. But those are the issues that we try to work past, right? Those are when we go out and explicitly try to get more of the community engaged and resolve those concerns. Arvind, you had a question.
Yeah, hi, Chris. The question is, how do you assess success? So, what kind of outcomes do you think would mean that this initiative is successful?
When you say this initiative, which specific initiative do you mean? An individual feature?
No, I'm referring to the aspirations that you're talking about in terms of being, more inclusive or being aligned with the standards. I mean, your presentation kind of alludes to a few aspirations. I'm trying to understand, what specific outcomes would make you satisfied, let's say the next BlinkOn, to say that, hey, we were successful.
So I think one of the most important success factors to me is being able to understand the picture for all of the features out there, all of the features that are going through journeys, being able to represent it and understand it at any point in time. And that's a lot of the work that we've been doing on Chrome status, was because we looked at it a year and a half ago, and we're like, this could be so much better. Like, this could be such a better capturing of where we are with any given feature. And we still have work to do there. The process had to change to reflect that as well, because at the time, I think it was so easy to get really far down the path of starting work on a feature before you even went to Chrome status or to any other tool or out in public, and that caused conflicts. I think another factor of success would be seeing fewer big surprises. We've definitely had some proposals for incubations that were not received well, and I think a lot of times that's been because we haven't done all the work in the open, and there's a lack of trust when people don't have transparency into that process. I think the more transparency we have, the better off we'll be. And I think we also recognize that Chromium is becoming a richer and richer ecosystem that isn't just Google. And the more we can make our other partners in Chromium happy, that's probably a good indicator of success as well. Brian, you're up. And struggling to unmute, I take it. Nope. All right. Nina.
Right. So something that is interesting to me is that we have the exact same process, regardless of complexity and size of the feature. Like, it seems to me we have the same process, whether we're like launching this new full-blown API that's got its own spec versus making, a tiny, well, obviously that's up to definition, but a smaller change in an existing established spec. Are there any plans to have some kind of distinction between these two?
Chris, I can take that if you want.
Go for it.
So at the API owners, we're having a conversation right now in conjunction with the tag about potentially providing a fast path for features where there might be some alternative process where we decide inside the Chromium community that something doesn't have to go through that full loop. I should say that one of the goals that we have tried to put into place in the Chrome side of our sort of standards process over the last few years has been to ensure that new features do wind up getting broken apart in a lot of cases, and that we launch something that's minimally viable, and then we come back with more features. So hopefully the granularity, in a lot of cases is more even, and that we end up in a situation where new features almost always incubate. They don't just sort of slipstream into old features. We have seen a bunch of cases where some small new property gets added to some accessor here or there, and it actually has a massive change behind it. And we don't want to incentivize the behavior wherein developers think they can smuggle the piano into the concert hall one key at a time. So there's definitely a balance there, and I would say that it's dynamic. So if you have a case where you think something is small enough and you'd like eyes on it, come talk to me and Alice Boxhall about potentially, helping partner with us about ways to front run some of the tag process on things that might otherwise only clog up their pipeline and cause you to slow down. Yeah.
So everything Alex just said. In addition, there is some guidance right now in the launching process, launching web features doc on chromium.org that I referred to earlier that is explicitly about this, like how to tell when it's a big new incubation versus just adding a little piece of code to what you already needed. And I think with that, we should probably end because it looks like we are a couple minutes over time. So thanks all. Feel free to ask more questions in the breakout room and I'll answer there.